Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Programming by Stealth, and this is installment number 179, recorded May 10th, 2025. I'm your co-host, Allison Sheridan, and of course, I'm joined by your lovely co-host, Bart Buchatz. Hi, Bart.
Hi, Allison. Isn't it nice you only have one show number these days?
I look back at the things I used to have to say. It was like, okay, it's this episode of that show that's embedded in this show, and then that show's part of this show. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've been off for a couple of weeks here. We had an excused absence, but then you and Helma stepped in with a tidbit, and we're back in the game working with Jekyll, right?
Yeah, I was really mean because I left you on a cliffhanger all those weeks ago. So we should probably do something about that, shouldn't we?
Yeah, you might have to brush a few cobwebs out of my memory here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so the last time we had done our very first little, very simple website using Jekyll on GitHub pages. And we had made a homepage in index.md. We had made a links page and an about me page. And unless you do something, the homepage doesn't automatically get links to the other pages on your site. That's up to you to connect the jigsaw pieces together, which would be the same if you were writing in HTML or whatever. So we manually did that. We used Markdown to make a list, and we wrote the link, and then we wrote the other link. And I said to you, now obviously that can't be the right way to do it because it works.
Basically like it's 1973. We were typing in it.
Yeah, it works for 3 pages, but not for 300. So there must be a correct way, TM. So let's do that. Let's do that correct way. So the answer to all of this, what is the right way, is that Jekyll comes with a templating engine, which is very like Mustache, which if you can brush those cobwebs off, and I dread to think how long ago that was.
But I still have a fond feeling for them. I know they're in the double squiggly brackets.
Yeah. So we can use a very similar tool, but it's called Liquid, and it will allow us to place little placeholders in our Markdown files, and those placeholders will get populated with relevant information, like the list of actual pages that actually exist. And so when you make a new page, the template will automatically take care of adding in the appropriate new page. And so every time you build your site, the list will be complete because it's built by the template.
I'm going to take a wild guess here and suspect that this is how, when we publish a new episode of Programming by Stealth, when we do the final push of the page, it shows up in the index?
That's exactly how it's done. And the interesting thing is,
we used to do it by hand.
Yes, we did. And it got very tedious, especially when we changed our mind on, how should we format this? Yeah, we have 200,
Lots of error-prone things, too.
Yeah.
Humans involved.
Yes. The interesting thing, actually, is that the amount of code to write it for our little dummy site with 2 pages is the same as the amount of code that powers the index on PBS with its 179 pages, because it's a loop.
Wow. Okay, cool.
Okay, so the Jekyll folks could have reinvented the templating wheel. They could have made up their own language. But as you've probably noticed by now, Jekyll is very open source. They didn't make their own of very much. Obviously they made Jekyll, but wherever they could, they leaned in and they took open source tools from other people and brought them into the project. And that's exactly what they did here. They took in a tool called Liquid, which is surprisingly old. 2006 is when it goes back to. And its origins are in a wee company you might have heard of called Shopify. And it was like
Oh, that's crazy.
The very, very, very first version of Shopify needed a templating language, and there wasn't one. They wrote it, and immediately on day one, they made it open source because that was the kind of company Shopify was.
Huh. That's cool.
It is cool. And to this day, when you are a Shopify customer designing your storefront, you use Liquid placeholders, Liquid templating, to lay out your store to make it look like yours.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Now, when they open sourced Jekyll, or sorry, not Jekyll, Liquid, they open sourced its essential elements as like the vanilla variant of Liquid. And that is an open source project, and it provides the basic features of the language and a few utilities that are just completely generic. They're not specific to a shop or to a static site generator. They're just very generic things like for loops and if statements and that kind of really generic stuff. And then they made a separate version, which is also open source, but it's the core version with the extra pieces to do a Shopify storefront. So the specific features you would need to do that. And so that gives us two versions. And when Jekyll came along, they took the same core. They ignored all the Shopify extensions because they're not making a shop. They're building a static site generator. So they made a third variant, which is their extensions. So while we're working, there are two pieces of documentation we care about: the core and the extensions provided by Jekyll.
Okay, so the core isn't specific to Shopify.
No, it's by
The
Shopify.
core is the core. So there's the core, the Shopify, and the Jekyll extensions to Liquid.
Yeah.
And we care about the core and the Jekyll extensions to Liquid.
Yes. And just to confuse you completely, the core is maintained by Shopify and the URL is shopify.github.io.
That's okay. That's okay. But it's called core. We should be able to keep up with that.
So, like with Jekyll itself, it matters what version you're looking at when you're reading the docs, because the docs will have little annotations for the newest features that say introduced in version X. So we're using GitHub Pages, which uses an older version of Jekyll, and Jekyll's always a little bit behind Liquid anyway. So we really do have to check. There are things in the documentation that we can't play with. So I mentioned last time that bundle show will list every single installed module and its version in your specific site. So when you have a Jekyll site and you're doing the, bundle exec, was it build or something to make it run? I don't remember. I just hit the up arrow on the terminal. But there's also in that same folder bundle show, and it will list all the versions. It'll take you forever. So if you use egrep and the regular expression Jekyll space pipe, which means or liquid, it will show you just the two version numbers we care about. So as of today, May 2025, Jekyll is 3.10.0 and liquid is 4.0.4. So when we're reading the docs and it says added in 4 point something of Jekyll, we can't play. But if it says added in 3.8, we can play.
So whenever you find a feature you want to use, you've got to look at when it was added and do a bundle show egrep Jekyll liquid and then find out. Okay.
But it only the new stuff has those little annotations. So when you're reading the docs and they went to the bother of putting an annotation, then you just want to double check.
That's when you should pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Or you can do it the old-fashioned way and just try and see if it breaks. Because if you try to use something that doesn't exist, you will get an error when you do the bundle exec build.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't recommend that.
I noticed in the way you typed out that command, maybe this is a nit, but it says bundle space show space pipe space egrep space, and then you've got single quotes around Jekyll pipe liquid, but you've got a space after Jekyll, but no space between the pipe and liquid.
Right. So the regular expression is JEKYL space or LIQUID, because Jekyll has about 20 gems, and all of the ones that are little sub gems start with Jekyll minus, and only the one we care about is Jekyll space.
Okay, but you would normally have a space after the pipe before liquid.
No,
Like
you
you do
wouldn't.
between
That
show and egress.
pipe is not a bash pipe. It is inside the single quotes. That is a regular expression.
Okay, well, I put a space and it worked.
Well,
I
it
just got
would
lucky.
work because there's a space in front of the L on liquid. If you look at the output, it's space star space liquid. So you putting another space
Oh,
there, it won't break the regular expression. You just got lucky.
okay, all right.
Yes. Now,
Okay, that was probably really boring for people who can't see it, but when you see it, you'll look and go, "Wait, Bart, that doesn't look right."
it's not symmetric. It has to be symmetric.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I have trouble with that.
Right. And one final, very, very small subtlety for us. There's one other tiny extension that we get. There's a module called GitHub metadata, which adds a tiny amount of extra functionality to Jekyll and Liquid. Tiny amount. The docs are linked in the show notes. It makes a few extra pieces of information available to us so that we can make really useful links to Git related things. So if you're on a documentation site for something, there's often a button in the top right corner, clone on Git. If they're using GitHub pages, they're using this extension so that that URL is always correct. And what you may notice if
Oh,
you do a fork of their repo and then you publish the docs from your fork, that button will automatically have your details instead of theirs. And that's because it's using
cool.
this little extension.
Okay.
Okay, so let's zoom out to the philosophical, what do I call it? Conceptual. That's the word I use in the show notes. So what is Liquid trying to do? So we're going to use the analogy of mustache because they both solve the same basic problem. You have strings that contain some sort of placeholder. You have a bucket of data. You combine those two to make new strings where the data has been inserted into the appropriate placeholder.
Perfect. I
Perfect. Good.
understand. I'm 100% with you so far.
Now, in Mustache Universe, we did that with a function that took two arguments, the string with its placeholders and a dictionary with the data. And then the return value from that function was the new string we built by combining those two things. But we're not calling functions, we're building a website. So the same concept.
I'm happy because I love Mustache. I love how it works, and I can beat it into submission. But I always have trouble with that 2-argument function thing. I'm always going, okay, I got to have this piece, and this piece, and which one does what?
Yeah. So in the case of what Jekyll does, it's actually a little bit easier because your strings that have the placeholders are the markdown files sitting in your docs folder, and the output is obviously going to be the website you build. So where does the data come from? Well, the answer is the data comes from Jekyll. Jekyll reads your input folder, converts that to a data structure, which it then converts to HTML. So that data structure is in Jekyll's brain, and you get to tap into it in your template. So your little placeholders get to tap into Jekyll's brain. And so you can ask it, how many pages are there on this site? And Jekyll's brain will say,
Oh.
well, actually, there's 5 of them, and they're called Boopity Boo and Boopity Boo. And then you can loop over them and show them. So you're never calling any functions.
Okay, that sounds a lot easier to me.
I believe it is. I find it a lot easier. I don't get confused. Yeah.
Good.
So, okay. So let's then have a look at, what did I say? Liquid's architecture. Okay. So the next thing, obviously, then is those pieces of data, right? So I've said to you that we get to look into Jekyll's brain. Well, Jekyll calls the bit of its brain it shows you liquid variables. So those variables expose the data that Jekyll is aware of. And if you dive in, it's actually stored in Ruby because remember, everything is Ruby here, even though I don't like Ruby, it's all Ruby. But that doesn't matter. It gets presented to us in a really generic form, the same generic form that you represent with JSON or YAML. In other words, values, lists of values, and dictionaries. and you can nest those any which way you like, and that's it. So all the data is simplified to that level.
Okay.
Okay, so the core variant has no variables. It defines none. Shopify variant, which we don't use, defines variables to do with running a shop. Your list of products by SKU and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter to us. We're not running a shop. So Jekyll provides its own list of variables that are specific to a website. And the documentation gives you the full list, and it's quite good documentation. But the three most important ones are really well named. The site dictionary contains information about the site as a whole. If you're using GitHub Pages, there's a little dictionary inside there called site.github, and that's where that extra stuff about the link to the repository and all that kind of stuff, that's where that hides. There's another dictionary named Page, and Page is always relevant to the page you're currently working on. So if you're in index.md, then Page contains information about index.md. If you're in about.md, Page contains information about.md. Get the idea. And then sorry?
Well, I was just going to say, you were talking about Liquid's variables, and then you switched to using the word dictionaries. And I think I see in the show notes where you talk about it, but I think you leaped over.
Okay, so
how
I
did we
said
go
that
from variables to dictionaries?
Variables could be single values, dictionaries, or lists. These variables are dictionaries. Site is a dictionary.
Say that. Let me try saying that. Variables can be a single thing or a dictionary?
Or a list, right? In JSON, a piece of data in JSON is either a string or a number, a dictionary, or a list.
Okay. I'll keep up.
Okay. The third variable, which is also of type dictionary, is layout, which is where stuff related to your theme appears. We're not looking at that this week. That is a next installment problem. But that is where the theme-specific stuff is available to you for use in your various placeholders. So that's the data. So we have our data, we have our markdown files into which we can put placeholders. So the syntax is, how do you do the placeholder thing? And I have put a little warning paragraph at the top of this section because I could hear you in my ears while I was typing. Back in 2006, the people who invented Liquid didn't pick the best names for one of the three pieces of the syntax. They picked a word that you hate because it means different things everywhere. Object. How many meanings are there for that word?
All of them.
All of them. It's a good description. Okay, so there's three pieces of syntax. Objects, terribly named. Tags, well named. Filters, really well named. So we're going to look at them in detail. A liquid object is the placeholder. So in Mustache, the two mustaches are your placeholders. In Liquid, your object is your placeholder, and the syntax is two curly braces.
Okay.
So at least that's familiar.
I'm glad you warned us ahead of time.
Oh yeah, otherwise this wouldn't have gone well.
That saved the audience a half an hour right there. Good job.
So within these curly braces, we need to specify the names of variables. So if a variable is just a single value, like a string or a number, you just put the name of the variable. Curly, curly, space, name of variable, close your curlies. But if the variable is a dictionary, then how do you get into the dictionary? Well, the syntax is just like we're used to in JavaScript, the period. Name of dictionary dot name of key. So site dot title will get you the title property of this, or this title entry in the site dictionary. And lists are just like JavaScript arrays. Square bracket and then a number. And like a good programming language, they count from 0.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yes. So two examples would be curly curly space site.description, close curly. That will get the description for the site, which is actually defined in the config file. Or site.pages0 in square brackets .title will get you the title from the first page, which is in the site's dictionary. So pages is an array, or sorry, a list.
I like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I thought so too. Then we come to our tags. So a liquid object, i.e. a placeholder, is just a way of saying splat this data here. But if you want to do anything more complicated, like put in an if statement, put in a loop, you use tags. So the tags are for doing the more advanced things. And the tags have a similar syntax, but it's different. It's not curly, it's curly %, and then %curly. So the percents are like extra powerful. I don't know how you want to try to remember it, but curly is just data, and curly % is I'm going to do something, some sort of loop or something.
I appreciate that you acknowledge that object is a terrible naming convention, and you said tags were good. Tag means where you put if statements. That's still kind of weird. That's going to be hard to be intuitive.
Okay, well,
to me,
it's not as bad. It's not as bad, right?
Right, but filters are going to be good. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay,
amazing. We'll keep going.
Yes.
So tags, squirrely bracket, %, closes, % squirrely bracket.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you see them in your code, I have two examples. Don't worry, we're going to look at these things in more detail later. But just to give you a flavor, you could have a sentence in a markdown file, say index.md, this site, and then you're going to have either is titled something, or else, if there is no title, you want it to say this site has no title. So that's an if statement, right? If this thing is true, show me the thing. Otherwise, put in this other silly piece of text. So the way you write that is this site, and then open your tag, if site.title, close your tag, is titled, open some sort of quotation mark, it's purely visual, curly, site.title, close curly, and then your other visual delimiter. So in other words, if this thing is true, plop in this placeholder. So it will say this site is titled, and then inside single quotes, my title or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have the tag else. So open curly %, else % close curly. I was going to say closing %.
You can just say open it. Just say open and close.
Yeah, I was going to say close %. What is a closing %?
Yeah. Open, close the tag.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you say has no title, sad face, because there had to be an emoji. Sorry, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tag end if, which is very bash-like.
Okay. I want to ask one cuddling question here.
Mm-hmm.
What you've written is this site, open the tag, if site.title, meaning basically, is there a site title? And then you cuddled is titled. Should there be a space in there, or is that some convention?
Okay, so I've made this example as simple as possible. You mentally subtract the curly brackets and ask yourself, do I want 2 spaces? Do I want this site space is?
Oh, because that's not going to be where the site title goes. That's just, if there is going to be a site title, then now we're going to talk. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Hard to do in audio, but you'll know why I was questioning it when you see it. Okay.
Indeed. And you can even do loops. So you can say, as a basic example, we start with again, markdown syntax. So we start with a title that says site pages, : and then we open a tag for space p in site.pages. So we're going to say that for each page, we're going to call it p, right? So it's a for each loop. And then inside that for loop, we have the markdown syntax for a list of links. So dash is a list item. You could use star either, whatever you prefer. It's markdown. Square bracket, then the texty bit, close square bracket, round bracket, and then the URL bit. Well, the text is going to be the title of the page, so curly p.title, and the link is going to be the URL for the page, so curly p.url.
This is way easier to read when you're saying it than it was looking at it, because the way he described it was great, but what it says is minus space square bracket curly space p.title curly left bracket open round brackets curly. It's just like, there are literally 6 like brackets in a row when you're just looking at it. But if you look at it from like the inside out or just as groupings, now it makes sense.
And that's because Markdown likes its brackets, and Liquid likes its
So does
brackets.
Liquid. Yeah.
Now, this is the bit where I love Liquid, because its job is to be a templating engine. So if you're writing a for loop in JavaScript and the array is empty, you have to do an if statement afterwards to deal with, well, what do I do if the array was empty? But it's such a normal thing on a website that the for tag in Liquid has an else statement. So you can just say else. What do I do if that list was empty? For else.
You're right. For else is not normal.
No, but
that
it's
isn't something we've seen before. But yeah, you said it. I was like, well, of course you'd have that. Yeah.
And so the else just says, this site has no pages, sad face, end for.
Yeah. Okay.
So, it's cool. So the Jekyll tags are mostly from core. And so they're documented in core. And I don't really understand why they broke it into 4 pages, because I don't think the groupings have sensible names. But anyway, there are 4 links in the show notes because the Shopify people think that the tags fall into control flow, which I've just put brackets around for your help. That's conditionals. They mean if, else, that kind of stuff. Iteration, that one's sensibly named. They mean loops. That one I got. The next one they call template. And what they mean is how to add comments, how to temporarily disable Liquid, and how to nest one Liquid template in another. That last one at least makes sense, but the other 2 make no sense with that name, but okay. And then the last one is called variables, and it does exactly what it says in the tin. So at least that one makes sense. And then the final link is the link to Jekyll's list of its few extra tags that it has added for our use on top of the core. Now, filters. Filters are used to transform data. You put data in one side of a filter, and slightly altered data comes out the other side. So you filter your data through filters. Thank goodness that would make sense.
That's a word that makes sense. Yeah.
And now we have just joked about how terribly overused the pipe symbol is. That is what they use to chain filters together. So you start off with a piece of data, which is usually a variable name, pipe, a filter, and then if you like, pipe, another filter, pipe, another filter, pipe, another filter. You can have as many of them as you like. And the end result of all of that plumbing...
For plumbing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the end of all of that plumbing is what gets inserted into the output, because the only place you're allowed to use filters is inside objects, which is the terrible name for placeholders. You can't use filters inside tags, asterisks with one exception. And there's actually a pseudo exception, because one of the filters is so useful that they had to find a way to let you use it inside tags without making the syntax explode. So every list has a free variable called .size, which is actually the size filter in disguise.
And is that size as in
length?
Number of?
So size is the one filter which does 2 things. If you give it a string, it will count the characters. And if you give it a list, it will count the entries.
Okay, so it is number of something.
It's number of entries or number of characters, whichever is appropriate.
Okay.
So, like I say, you start off with some data and you pipe it to a filter. The simplest filters take no arguments, right? The size filter takes as its input a piece of data and the output is a number. There's no need for any arguments. But some of the filters are more powerful and they do expect arguments. And the way you tell Liquid, I'm going to give you some arguments, is you put a colon after the name of the filter. And my favorite example filter I use here in the show notes because it's so useful on web pages is the default filter, right? Instead of saying, if the site has a title, do this, else do that, you can take page.title, pipe it to default colon, and in the default colon, you put the text to use if there is no title. So it defaults the page title to the string you give it. So either pass it through, or if it was empty, use this placeholder or use this default instead.
So this is considered to have an argument because its default colon is the filter and the argument is whatever you're going to say instead?
Yeah. Yeah, how else would you give the instead,
Okay.
right? Because the
How's
real
that different
data
than
is piped into
using
default.
else?
Well, it's way shorter syntax. So our example of an if statement was pretty ugly. The equivalent here is an example that just has a bolded page ID colon followed by one liquid object, one placeholder. So curly, page.id, and not all pages have an ID. So page.id pipe to default colon, this page has no ID. That's it. That's a whole if else statement collapsed into just the page ID or this
Okay.
piece of text.
So we could have done it with an if else, but this is a cleaner, easier way.
Bing, bing, bing.
All right.
Much cleaner.
Okay.
Like you do this a lot, right? If you think about
Yeah.
it. Okay. So we've already mentioned the size filter, so we'll leave that one aside. What do we have next in the show notes? Yes, links to the official documentation. So
hang on. No. You got to tell us what the one exception is to filters being used inside tags.
Yes, I do. You can use them in one tag, the assign tag, which is how you set the value of a variable. And we are going to come to that in about 1 minute. But before we come to that, I need to tell you for the third and final time, there are 2 documentation pages for filters. The ones provided by Core and the ones provided by Jekyll. And in this case, Jekyll provides more than Core. Core provides a lot, but Jekyll provides a lot. And the Jekyll ones are extra cool because they're relevant to web pages, right? So we're going to use the Jekyll ones quite a bit. Okay, so now let's come to our one exception. You can't put a filter straight into a for tag because a for tag is a tag. So how do I loop over a filtered list? If I have a list that has too many things, if you think back to our Nobel laureates example, maybe you only want to list the Nobel Prizes that were won by 3 or more people. How would you do that filtering if you're not allowed to use any filters inside the for loop? Well, the answer is you make a variable that holds the filtered list and then you loop over your filtered list. So you say, assign some new name to the output of the filter, and then for whatever in name of the new list. But I'll walk you through an example because that was hard to say out loud. So the tag to make let me say that again. The tag to assign the value to a variable is assign. So that's a name you're going to like. So you say open curly %assign space name of the new variable you're making equals, and then you can put whatever you like. So you could put a string or a number or something that you pipe to any filter. And then the output of the filter gets saved into your new variable. And then you can use that variable in your loops or whatever you like.
You're looking at me and seeing my brow furrowed. And the reason is because every single time you say tag and filter, I'm having to look up in my head what those words mean. They don't mean anything to me yet. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, I literally can't remember which one is a tag and which is a filter, and I know I can't use one thing inside of the other, but I don't know which one. The words are still foreign to me. It's like you've taught me 2 Spanish words, but I don't know what they mean yet. The syntax looks fine.
Good. That's actually more important because the syntax
I
is
am
quite
curious
sensible.
about some dashes are flying around in here, hyphens. What are those in the syntax?
Oh, sugar, I accidentally used them too early once. Darn. I thought I'd removed the early ones. Put a pin in that.
Yeah, because I asked about that in my text about pre-reading this, but okay, we'll come back to what those hyphens mean.
Very shortly, actually. Yes, we're out by a little bit here. Yeah.
Okay.
They don't affect the logic. They affect the presentation. So we're going to do an example where we're going to loop over something that we need to filter before we loop over it. So imagine that for some reason you want to add to our little dummy website a list of all the JavaScript files in our website. It's a somewhat arbitrary example, but hey, why not? We can look into Jekyll's brain. It will tell us all the JavaScript files. So there is a variable called site.static_files that contains every file that Jekyll is going to take from our input folder and copy straight to our output folder without changing, which is, it includes all of our JavaScript files and some other stuff. So that list has what we want and more. It has more than we want. So we need to filter it down to only what we want. And so site is a dictionary which contains static_files, which is a list of dictionaries, and each entry contains the description of one of those static files. And one of the keys on each of those static files is ext name, which is the file extension. So JavaScript files have a file extension of .js. So we know that what we want is only the static files where ext name is .js. And when I say it in that specific phrasing of English, how this is done becomes really obvious. There is a filter named where, which takes 2 arguments. The name of the key in the dictionary that you're interested in, ext name, and the value we want that key to have, .js. And it will take a list as input, look at each item in that list and see, do you have a key ext name and does it have the value JS? Yes, you pass. No, sod off. You disappear into nothingness. And so the output of that where filter is going to be only the files that have an extension .js. And that's inside our assign tag. So assign js_files equal to site.staticfiles pipe where : ext name.js.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense the way you say it.
Yeah. So now we have our list of files we want, so we can just use a for tag. So for file in js_files, and then the markdown syntax for a list of code tags, which are the paths to those files. So dash to start our list, backtick to start our code block, and then a placeholder, i.e. a badly named object, curly, file.path, close curlies.
Why is that in a code block?
Well, because in my markdown, I want the file path to be monospaced. I have my choice. If I was writing the show notes.
Okay. So you're building a list inside of a web page, and you wanted that to be monospaced. You didn't have to do that.
Right. Yes.
It could have been in the text, but this is a file.path, so you would want it monospaced. Got it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, because we're
nothing to do with liquid.
Yes.
Just plain old markdown. Okay.
Plain old markdown. Yes. So I tried that, and if you copy and paste that code into index.md and build your site, it will generate that list. It will have a whopping 1 file. /assets/js/bootstrap.bundle.min.js, which is the whole of Bootstrap, and that's the only JavaScript we have at the moment.
Okay, you just made a giant leap. Wait, what? Just slap it into the index anywhere? In the beginning, in the title, in the front matter? Where?
Wherever you'd like it in the content. It's just Markdown.
I don't know where I want it.
Bottom. You want it at the end of the page. If you wanted it at the top of the page, you could put it at the top of the page. It's Markdown.
Okay. I thought there was going to be a step in this where you would tell us. Okay.
So Jekyll's
I really
job.
don't know what this.
Okay, step back. Right, zoom all the way back. Stop and think for a sec. So Jekyll's job is to take Markdown files and transform them into the HTML of our web page. And for so far, that transformation has only done Markdown to HTML, but Jekyll supports templates. So if we put this liquid syntax in our Markdown files, Jekyll will do the liquid, then convert the Markdown to HTML.
I'm remembering I can't do this.
You
I can't see
Alison,
this and do it.
You can. You copy from line 2 to line 7 in the example, and it will work perfectly.
No, because I'm not connected. This is just a Markdown file sitting on my desktop. It's not anywhere. It has to go somewhere, right? It has to go up to GitHub to work.
It doesn't have to go to GitHub. Remember, if you follow our instructions from the previous installment for testing locally, you can test it locally. But no, we haven't done this in weeks.
A month and a half ago.
Yeah, I know.
A month and a half ago.
I know, we haven't done it in weeks. We haven't done it in weeks. That's why.
Okay, so.
My bad, Alison. I should have told you this morning to get things back to the way they were after we recorded 6 weeks ago before you went on holidays.
But everybody else needs to know too, right? How to, how? What do we do now? I know how to plop it into the Markdown file, but do I have to?
So the previous installment was dedicated to getting our site up and running. So if you do what we did in the previous installment, you have everything you need. I'm not sure I want to talk the entire installment now.
No, but okay. The worked example is going to be fall a little flat here when you get to it because I'm not going to be able to play along, I think.
No, and that's my fault. I'm sorry, Alison. I should have thought of that. It was my Mac hasn't done anything in 6 weeks, so everything was where I left it. But I shouldn't have assumed yours would be the same.
Mine is where I left it too.
Then you probably have a folder named PPS demo with all of this in it. But look, we're recording now, so my bad. I apologize.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Where was I? Filters. Yes, okay. Right, done. Okay, so within Liquid, we have these pieces of data. So I should mention the data types you have to play with. The answer is very few because it's compatible with JSON and YAML. You can have Booleans. There are 2 of them. TRUYE represents true. FALSE represents false. Pretty straightforward. You can have numbers. They are just numbers. So 42 or 3.1417. No quotation marks. Nothing funny. You can have strings, which you can single or double quote at your leisure, at your desire, and it will make no difference. You can have arrays. You do so, you can access them with square brackets. You can use positive indexes or negative indexes to count from the back of the array. So -1 is the last element, -2 is the second last element, and so forth, which is a convenience sometimes. And then you have dictionaries, which you just use with the period symbol like you would in JavaScript or whatever.
Okay.
And then an important note about truthiness. So we are used to the fact that in every language, when you force something to become true or false, which is called coercing, there are rules for what is true and what is false. And so in JavaScript, we're used to 0 being false, false being false, null being false, and I can't remember now if an empty array is false, but I think it is. Right? Liquid has a very different view of things. There are exactly two things that are false. There is nil, which I forgot to tell you is Liquid's version of null, and false. Everything else is true. 0 is true, an empty string is true, an empty list is true, an empty dictionary is true. And this actually does work better for building websites, but it comes as a surprise to JavaScript people.
Right.
So it catches me out quite often. And what I forgot to tell you is that as well as nil, there is another fantastically useful keyword, empty. So you can say, if my string double equals empty, will tell you if it's empty, or if my list double equals empty, it will tell you it's empty. So the special value empty is like, I am a string that does exist, but it has nothing in it. Or I am a list which does exist, but has nothing in it.
Okay.
And finally, we come to operators. So we're used to being able to do arithmetic with operators in most programming languages. Not here. In Liquid, the only operators you have are for doing comparisons. Everything else you do with filters. So if you want to add 5 or 6 numbers, you send them to the sum filter. If you want to subtract numbers, you send them to the subtract filter. The only thing you do with operators is compare. Thankfully, they're quite sensible. You have double equals for is equal to, exclamation point equals for is not equal to, the less than symbol for less than, the greater than symbol for greater than, the standard less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. When you need to combine things into logic, you have the AND word. So instead of ampersand in JavaScript, you just use the word and. And instead of two pipes in JavaScript, you just use the word or. And then lastly, you have an operator that you don't have in JavaScript, contains, which does a substring check. And it will actually work on arrays. So if you give it an array of strings, it will look for that substring in every string in the array and tell you whether or not any of those strings contain your substring.
That seems useful.
Yeah.
All of those seem perfectly logical.
They are, and they look very obvious in code. Now we get to those little minus signs you accidentally noticed because I accidentally included too early. This is to do with how should Jekyll deal with empty space so that you don't have to cuddle things needlessly. And the minus sign basically means eat all of the white space to my left or eat all of the white space to my right. And then you don't cuddle, but the white space vanishes.
Wait, what?
Okay.
Eat?
Make not appear, right? Make it go away. So you put the minus sign directly inside opening curlies or closing curlies, and it effectively devours all the white space to the left or to the right of the curlies. Okay, here's an example, right? Here is the input. I space like space, curly curly, dessert, close curly, very much smiley face. And I'm telling you that the variable dessert has the value waffles in all capitals. And then we have the same line with a minus on the opening set of curlies. The same line again with a minus on the closing curlies. And then finally, the same line again with a minus on both curlies. What does that become when you output the template? The first one, you get I space like space waffle space space much. So there are no minuses. The spaces to the left and right of the curlies stay exactly where they are. The next line.
This seems like a very obscure, weird thing to learn about. Why?
Okay. If you don't put
this?
those minuses in and you have, say, an assign tag, that will make an empty line. And then you have a for tag that makes another empty line. And then you have an else
Wait,
tag, and that will make another empty line.
How are these things making an empty line?
Well, they're so they're physically in the markdown, right? So
Yeah, but they're inside squiggly brackets, so they
right,
would
so the
be
squiggly
code
brackets
not
vanish.
execute.
But if you write the squiggly brackets on a new line so that they look easy to read, then you've added new line followed by the squiggly brackets. The squiggly brackets vanish, but the new line doesn't.
Okay. So does the minus inside the squiggly brackets remove a new line?
Yes, all white space.
Huh. Okay.
Basically, leave them out. You'll see white space. You'll want it to go away. Put them in. The white space will go away.
Okay. I'm going to change all of this to not saying that you like desert very much, and I'm going to change it to dessert, just so you know. I missed it. I've been through these show notes twice, and I missed it both times, so.
Okay. Oh, I can't believe I still do that. How often have I been using waffles and pancakes?
Yep. But I always tell you, you like it, so it should have more of it. It should have 2 S's, because it's more of it.
I'm going to say what I've said a million times. That makes perfect sense, Alison. I'll never forget that again.
By the way, in the background, I think I might have Jekyll running.
Oh, good.
Bundle exec Jekyll serve.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how to see the
It should tell you in the
HTML
output
file.
where the URL is.
Oh, that's right. Okay, cool. All right. We have a chance that I'll be caught up by the time we get there.
Well, good, because we're there. We have just arrived. So we get to do our teaser now. So in your folder where your Jekyll is running, there is a file named index.md. I think that's a true statement. So if you open that file right now, before we do anything, it should have a section near the bottom that says hashtag site pages. And then it should have a list with about, which links to about, and links, which links to links.
I'm still catching up with some stuff, so I'm not quite with you there. Yes, the about and links. I've got it running.
Okay, so that is our hard-coded list of pages. Now, that is obviously our bad smell, because while it's perfectly fine to hard-code a list of 2, a list of 200, not so much. So our problem to be solved is that we would like to replace that hard-coded list with one that will take care of itself using liquid templates. So there's a few things to do here. So the first fact that the Jekyll documentation would tell you is that the site variable, which is a dictionary, contains a list of all of our pages, which is named pages, which is a very good name for it.
We can't see any of this, right? This is just because you have looked up what these, oh, please let them be tags, are? No.
Variables.
That's a dictionary?
Variables.
Okay. I was going to be right eventually. I was just going to keep saying words until I got to it. But you know that site exists as a variable, which is a dictionary.
Yes.
And you know it contains a list named pages because you've read the documentation. We can't look in our folders and see this.
Correct, because
okay,
the content of site.pages is determined by what's in your folders. The fact that it's there is what the Jekyll developers chose to name it, and so that comes from the Jekyll documentation. So site.pages will contain different data depending on what's in your folder. So if you add another page, then sites.pages gets more information.
Got you.
Okay, so site.pages contains a list of every single file that Jekyll transformed as it moved it from the input folder to the output folder. So index.md was transformed into just /, which is an HTML file. About.md was transformed into about.html, and links.md was transformed into links.html. And assets/CSS/style.css, that SCSS was transformed into a plain old CSS file. So it's in that array too. That array has too much information. That's okay, because when you read further down the docs, there's site.html_pages, which is only the things that exist in your folder that will become HTML files in the output. In other words, our 3 markdown files. That's almost what we want. Still got one too many. You don't want a link to the home page on a list of pages on the home page. You wouldn't do that as a human, right? It's not there in our hard-coded list. Yes?
Right. That wouldn't make sense.
So this gives us an opportunity to learn about the very powerful tag that Jekyll adds called where_exp. This allows us to use a condition to filter a list. So we get to say some sort of a logical statement using a double equals or not equals should be applied to everything on the input, and then only the things that match appear in the output. So we want to take all of the HTML pages that do not have the title home, and they're the ones we want to print. That makes sense?
Yeah, but you've used a where_exp. Did you just explain that already?
Yes, I've just said this gives
Okay.
us an opportunity to learn about.
We're learning so much before I know how this works that my head is really full here.
Yeah, I tried
we're learning lots of examples of variables and tags and things before doing anything with it yet. So I'm a little I'm verklempt. I'm a little overwhelmed, but I'm trying.
Well, we're teetering here. I had to get the smallest working example, and this is what we needed to learn to get here. So we're seconds away here. For our listeners who would like to play along, if you would like to make a folder that looks just like the one Alison is looking at now, you can get that snapshot by downloading the appropriate commit from GitHub, which I have linked in the show notes, or you can clone the whole repository and make sure you check out the commit with the tag PBS179-starting point, whichever you find easier. Both will work.
Is PBS 179 starting point the end of PBS 178?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'm in my PBS 178.
Yes,
my PBS Jekyll demo site is what we created. It wasn't really okay. That's where I am.
Perfect. That was
that's
exactly how we left it. So perfect. It's just if you're listening back in the future, you can get there in one step.
Back in the future. Okay.
Yeah. Wibbly wobbly. Okay. So inside your index.md, we have this hard-coded list. And for right now, I'm going to ask you to just copy and paste in this updated code. And what you can see, because we're working in the raw markdown, and what the listeners will not see, is that line 1 and line 10 aren't real.
I'm ignoring those now.
Perfect. So the listeners will never see those lines. And so there you start at # site pages and you end with end4.
Yes.
And you copy that
so
over.
I copy and paste that into index.md.
Hit save.
And then I hit save. And then I see a regenerating thing happen over in the terminal.
And then you refresh your page and nothing should change because it should have made the same list.
Well, actually, I didn't delete the old one, so now I have it twice.
Okay, that works.
And it did work.
Okay.
Okay.
So we now know that this this Jekyll syntax works. So now let us carefully pull it apart. Dissect the frog. So the first thing we have to do is make a new variable that contains only the pages we want. So we're going to call that variable list_pages because it's a list. Sorry, it's the pages we want to go in our list. So list pages. We're going to set that equal to site.html pages piped to the filter that's going to remove the home page that we don't want. And this is our first time we're meeting this very powerful filter called where_exp, which is...
What does that mean?
Where some expression is true.
Okay.
So the expression we want is title not equal to home. That's the expression, right?
Okay. Right.
We want all the pages that are not home.
Right.
So the syntax is, okay, remember for loops. You say for I equals. And instead of I, you could use pancakes or petunias, but everyone uses I, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you couldn't read your own code 6 months from now. This is a similar situation. The first argument is the name you are going to give to the thing, which is item. So just like for I, it's where exp item. And you're just always going to use item, right?
Okay.
Which means that inside the second argument, you refer to each page as item. So item.title not equal to home. And so the first time the loop happens, it will say about. Is about's title home? No. Thou shalt pass. Links. Is links' title home? No. Thou shalt pass. Index.md. Is your title home? Yes, it is. Fail. You vanish into the ether. And so what gets saved is the pages without home.
I'm going and I'm deleting that piece just so I can see whether to put home in. And yes, home is in the list.
Perfect. So it is filtering it out. So we now have our list. So we can now use a for loop. So for loops are for tags. So for p in list_pages, that's going to loop over all the pages and call each one p. So then we have the markdown syntax for a list of links. And into that syntax, we put two placeholders. p.title inside mustaches, which is the title for the page. So that will be links and about. And then we have another placeholder which does contain p.url, which is going to be the URL, and then it contains a filter. Stick a pin in that for about 30 seconds. Then we have our else tag, and then we have the markdown for a list with one item in italics, no pages yet. And then we have our end for. So if you were to delete about.md and links.md and rebuild the site, then it would say no pages yet. And then if you put them back and rebuild your site, then it will show the list again.
Okay. By the way, this does leave an empty line between the two links. So we're missing a minus somewhere. So it's got about on a line and links on a line, but there's an empty line in between. So there's a minus missing somewhere.
My version didn't do that. It's possible the file in the actual zip file has a slightly different syntax. So the last one I pasted into the show notes, I will take that as a little piece of homework for me to verify that what's in the zip file, which I know works, is what ends up in the show notes. So you're right, we are missing a minus
possibility
somewhere.
I can figure this out while we're talking. All right.
Okay.
I'm with you. We did it.
So I asked you to put a pin in the filter. So we have one more pin to pick up. So the filter is named relative_URL. And this filter is important to make our web page work everywhere. So when you're working locally, the URL, right? So if you look in Safari, it says localhost:4000 / which maps exactly to your docs folder. But when you work on GitHub, it's your username.github.io/repository name /. You're not working at the root, you're working at a different folder. If you leave off the relative URL, your website will work when you test it locally. You'll be very happy with yourself. You'll push, and it'll break because it won't know how to handle that folder. So the relative URL filter, which is part of Jekyll, not part of Core Liquid, handles that reality. Very important. And that
Good to know.
is it. That is it all.
That's all of it.
Yeah. So basically, we just spent the last hour and a bit explaining 8 lines of code.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
The other thing we've managed to do is, with one notable exception, that's Liquid. The docs tell you the details of every possible tag and the details of every possible filter, but there are no more concepts apart from one, which is what we're going to talk about next time, which is, how do themes work? And the answer is Liquid, but we haven't looked at that aspect of Liquid yet. So that is what we will do next time. We're going to start making our theme not be quite so basic, because at the moment our theme is spectacularly basic. And I asked you to just take it on faith that you copy and paste these files into your layout folder and it'll just work. Well, it's time to kill your faith and replace it with knowledge.
Oh, there you go. By the way, I did figure out where that extra, not exactly why, how that extra empty line got in there, but it has to do with not being in source code mode in Typora, the text editor we use. So I'm not sure why it puts it in there, but I switched to source code format and I pasted and it worked just fine. So you have no homework.
Okay, that's a very subtlety.
Yeah. Actually, no, you do have homework. You have to go get rid of the minuses that you have in the thing before you teach it to us.
I need to figure out how to do that. I think I might do what you suggested and put in a stick a pin in those minuses sentence. I'll have a read.
There you go. There you go. That's the way to do it. All right. Well, I apologize for not knowing what I was doing, getting Jekyll back up after 6 weeks.
Yeah, you went all the way around the world. You're forgiven.
And I caught up and got it installed in got it running in the time that you were talking. So luckily we were on the table of operators and I'd already read those, so I knew what you were going to say. So I was able to nod knowingly and keep going.
This is a silly question, but did you fly like literally around the world, or did you double back in yourself and do the same half of the world twice?
No, just double backed and did the same. That would be a long way to go the other way.
Yeah, via Abu Dhabi. I'm sure you can fly via Abu Dhabi. You can get to everywhere via Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, this was only, was it 8 or 9 hours I was off? I think it was, no, it was 16. That's right, it was 16. So I flipped to the other side of Bart. We're normally 8 hours in one direction and we were 8 hours in the other direction. That was very head-bending, I gotta say.
That's my world, right? But the thing is, I'm a night owl and you're a morning person. So the way America and Ireland are is perfect. It wasn't perfect the other way.
No, we were in the null set there. We just like leave little notes for each other to read the next day. It was like telegraphing. So
anyway,
I have
one more thing I want to say before you wrap
vacation.
Up.
Okay.
Now that you have discovered the joys of whiskey, the next time you come visit this little island, am I going to treat you?
If people were reading my travelogue, which is going to make no sense when people hear this years from now, I discovered that I like single malts whiskey. It's not just whiskey, it's single malt that I like.
Well, that's fantastic, because you'll notice that we only drink the good stuff in this house.
Oh, there you go. Good to know. All right. Well, I think we should probably call it, Bart. We got there in the end.
Indeed we did. We managed to blow off the dust and yeah, gosh, it's been a while. But hey, we're back in the saddle. We're back next time with template or themes. And until then, folks, happy computing.
If you learn as much from Bart each week as I do, I'd like you to go over to lets-talk.ie and press one of the buttons over there to help support him. He does 98% of the work here. I'm just the stooge that listens to him and asks the dumb questions. If you go over to lets-talk.ie, you can support him on Patreon, you can donate via PayPal, or you can use one of his referral links. I really hope you'll go over and help him out. In the meantime, you can contact me at Podfeet or check out all of the shows we do over there over at podfeet.com. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.